Miranjo, close friend to Boss, the central antagonist, and the darling character viewers seem to love to hate. So much so that, despite the popularity of Ranking of Kings, the conclusion of Miranjo appeared to disappoint or confuse many. Discourse around this series in general tended to sour as it reached its second half, and while I may understand issues with the pacing slowing down, reaction to the ending of the main conflict surprised me. I feel that this disconnect between viewer and show may partially be cultural or social, or just a stark contrast in worldview. Ranking of Kings shows itself to be very non-judgmental across the series, believing in rehabilitation of characters who have performed bad actions, even if it may not be immediate. To explore this, let's look over the development of Ranking of Kings' idea of non-retributive justice surrounding Miranjo. I think a way in which viewers easily dismiss Miranjo is not simply because of her role as antagonist, but because, overwhelmed by the adorableness of Bojji, they dismiss her outright. Of course, this is contradicted by Bojji's own viewpoint, wanting to go as far as to save Miranjo herself, and not simply due to his father's wishes either. Bojji's friendship with Kage started and continues to blossom due to their somewhat mutual humility and lack of judgment due to their circumstances, Kage being the one to often besmirch this. In the case of accusing Despa and thereby doubting Bojji's training, his confrontation with Hilling, and finally his own lack of self-worth to Bojji when he ascends to the throne. Both Kage and Bojji share a sense of weakness due to their birth. Kage being born to a persecuted clan of thieves and assassins, turning to petty thievery himself, and Bojji born with his strength taken from him. Ousama Ranking uses this idea to explicate how weakness can be overcome, but also how one can fall prey to their own faults. But the best way in which this moral fiber is digested is through the development of Daida, seen namely in the court politician's parable as they take him through town. They spot a crippled blind man, which invokes Daida's revulsion with the weak and his own hatred for not wanting to be debilitated. This causes the advisors to flip this on him in order to make him realize what is needed of him as a king. But he does not take this in immediately, still retaining his sense of superiority and spurning his brother's weakness, going so far as to order his death, all the way up until his entrapment within Boss's body by Miranjo. It is here we see the thematic comparison between him and the Huoma mage that drives the point of the story home in a redemptive manner. Miranjo's memories are first elucidated through a shadowy confrontation between the Gyakuza and Daida. Though Daida at first views Miranjo's scarred figure with disgust, he is then treated to its circumstance as a victim of some Gyakuza residents. He then proceeds to lambast the Gyakuzans for their actions, overcoming his initial abhorrence with Miranjo's feeble and mangled face. Daida's feeling of superiority over the weak came from his upbringing under Hilling, along with his position he failed to inherit. But here he realizes the infeasibility. This is further explicated when he finds out too that Bojji's weakness was a circumstance not under his own control. One can then see the anger directed against his father upon this revelation. The upbringing and development of Miranjo acts as a metaphorical and literal mirror for Daida. Miranjo had an opposite upbringing to Daida, yet fell prey to a similar conclusion. Attempting to abandon her empathy, she sought to embrace a selfish desire to see the world with Boss again, even against the wishes of Boss himself. Much like Daida, however, she found herself constrained by the role she came into, her soul ensnared by the demon's promises, thereby forced to continue this path. This causes her to fall into desperation and violence to retain this, utilizing pawns such as Oken and the released criminals similar to Daida and his usage of the Big Four for assassination against Bojji and other tasks. Within the black space Miranjo trapped him in, however, Daida becomes witness to parental memories and thus host to overcoming his small-minded perspective. The role of king and its ramifications conditioned onto him from a young age caused him to look down upon the weak, whether it's the disabled, Bojji, or his own subjects. Miranjo's entrapment is much more bleak, and even should she finally be freed of this constraint in similar fashion, her distrustful mindset would see nothing but a life of punishment, as she sees in the demon's world. Miranjo's trauma stems from her innocent mother's death and her disfigurement at the hands of a group of greedy gyakuzins, yet also saw these same people violently punished by boss for their actions. So, once Miranjo is freed from this constraint, as Bojji personally embodies the idea that no person, no matter how small or large, ought to be valued and saved, to punish her through force or threat of pain or death would be little more than continuing what made Miranjo in the first place. It would vindicate her actions against others while ensnared by the demon, and contradict the themes of the series itself. Of course, this does not translate into outright rewarding her, as Daida's proposal stems from the natural course of their combined development, acknowledged in spite of her actions. Ones Daida also similarly took. Hate the sin and not the sinner. Bojji's mother says this to Miranjo herself at one point. Now, there is one note of contention to the sanctity of this theme in the depiction of the gyakuzins. The gyakuzins are a people who were initially allied with the Huoma, who took them from their small culture to civilizational standards closer to the Huoma themselves for the sake of staffing the Huoma's war with the gods. But the Gyakuza kingdom is described by Boss as having a culture of betrayal and greed, which culminates in them backstabbing the Huoma by siding with the gods, and killing Miranjo's mother in the process. Her mother had previously been trying to set an example alongside teaching them magic, which led to her untimely demise. Outside of this, however, we don't see an attempt otherwise, as the Huoma seem to keep on arming the Gyakuzins over anything else. The contention comes exactly from this depiction, as the Gyakuzins seem by their very nature evil. I understand where this comes from, but I think viewing them as a contradiction is a misreading. The Gyakuzins themselves are also victims of circumstance, and the details in Miranjo's backstory only come from one perspective. The Gyakuzins are still people trying to live who saw no other way. After all, the ethics of Miranjo's mother led to her demise. If the Gyakuzins are by their nature evil for this depiction, then the criminals would be in even greater contention, as they are shown to be utterly deceitful and greedy outside of Gigan. Boss ultimately kills the Gyakuzins, even a mother and her innocent child, whereas Bojji does his utmost to save the criminals. Then there is another addition to this point made by some particular reviewers that I wish to address. The addition is that the Gyakuzins and Huoma are actually an allegory for Korea and Japan, and that this is somehow representative of the author's politics of besmirching the Koreans resisting Japanese occupation circa 1895 to 1945. This idea comes out of nowhere but the reviewers' heads, and their only verifiable point at this angle is the illustration of Gyakuzin houses supposedly resembling pre-industrial Korea. But this is entirely cherry-picked, as pre-industrial Korea looked very different, and the only examples close to these straw houses you will find are in rural villages such as Yangdong village. However, these houses don't have the same flat roofs or sticks used for bases, and alongside this, they look the same as architecture in rural Japan such as Uchi-Jiuku. These houses resemble any straw shack from a pre-industrial era, whether it be East Asia or medieval Europe, so this singular point of evidence does not hold under scrutiny. Neither do I think automatically assuming World War II propaganda in a modern Japanese person's worldview at the drop of a hat is conductive either. And honestly, I think this says a lot more about the kind of person that makes this assumption than anything else. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. If you enjoyed it and would like to see more content like this, we'd greatly appreciate if you could leave a like, subscribe, and to share the video with anyone else who may enjoy it. We're a small channel, so small gestures like this really do help us greatly.